Yeah, hey, look at that. Woohoo! All right, like Chad said, I normally don't like it. I don't even feel right speaking at my own conference or any of that stuff. I just want to get up and introduce everybody and do things. But I haven't done this in a while. I haven't actually spoken in front of people in a little bit. So I had done this for a customer of mine for in my day job. I created this. They asked me to create this presentation, and it actually came out pretty well. They gave me some good kudos about it and said it gave them a lot of good data. So I figured I would try it here. Obviously, changed it around a little bit for this. Took their name out of it, which was a big thing. They didn't want me to do that. So yeah, I'm going to talk about evolution of data governance and data protection. This wants me to rehearse. I'm not going to do that. I guess this would be rehearsal. So it is a happy accident that Concentric happens to be here today doing this talk, but I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good little incident. The only thing is I know Pedro is very good at this topic, so I hope I do it justice. Pedro, tell me later if I screwed anything up. All right, so just a quick introduction of myself. I'm at Trace3 Advisory CISO. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been doing a bunch of different things. I co-founded USecCon back in 2010, spoke at a bunch of conferences. I do a lot of podcasting, and I was in the Army. He was in the Marines, so we will fight later. He'll beat me. But that's me. So agenda, I'm going to be talking about first data governance, data protection evolutions from like the 2000s to the mid 2010s. I did not go back into the 90s, even though I was in IT in the 90s. It was just a ever-living mess back in the 90s. It was usually, like if you worked in healthcare, it was all your data was on a mainframe or on a VAC system or a DEC, something like that. So I decided to move a little more recent, but this was applicable to my customer who was a healthcare customer who this made more sense to them, so I stuck with that. I'll go into the data governance, data protection in the late 2010s into today, and then kind of talk about what does all of this mean, like as I'm thinking about it, how do I see it, and then kind of a bonus of advanced threats. I'm not going to dig too deep into that, but I think it's applicable to stuff that we need to look at for advanced threats that are today and what's coming. Yes, AI is going to be there. So sorry. We've talked about that enough probably, but Hutch never gets enough AI. All right, so evolution of data governance, data protection, 2000s to mid 2010s. So yes, I used AI to create all these graphics. It kept giving me stuff like a data lake that was really weird looking, like it had like a water and like a wall, and it was really odd. And I said, well, what about a data pipeline? And it created me a data pipeline. So I said, okay, I'll just use this. I'll go with it. So anyway, so you're going to see a lot of that kind of weird stuff because I used it to do the rest of it anyway. So, but I did think it was cool because I told it to do 2000s and it gave me that, old computers and not a flat screen and stuff. So it knew what it was doing. So this was what I don't know that everybody categorized it this way. When I was doing my research to put this together, this was what I categorized that era, which is a big data era. So back then, you really, what you started getting from a governance as we started coming out of the 90s into the 2000s and kind of the modern era with all the internet and everybody just being able to share everything, is kind of like some formalized data management that needed to get put in place. Organizations were saying, hey, we need to formalize our data management. We kind of didn't do it right from this point because now we're at a point where we're finally get technology that can actually do it, but they knew that they needed to formalize this, but it was really not any kind of systems that were doing a very good job of it. They were doing a lot of stuff manually. People don't realize that like ERP systems, of course, but like data lakes really aren't a massively modern invention as a concept. They've been around for a long time. So you really started seeing that where they were getting data in a lot of different places. But what the challenge is just this growing volume of data. Everybody was putting this all together and it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's where the big data era, why I termed it a big data, is because that's kind of where it started. I don't think I was really using that term. I don't know about y'all, but I don't think I was really using that term probably until after 2010. But from the perspective of kind of where it started and whether it all started getting pulled together, that's when it really kind of started. So what you had then from a protection standpoint then is you still had very traditional perimeter security, and I'll show you a graphic of that in a little bit. Basic encryption was kind of in place. That like you didn't have a lot of compute power on endpoints to be able to do this. On PCs, they couldn't do that. So back then, if you would have asked how much traffic on the internet was encrypted, I think back then it was like 20%, something like that. I mean, you didn't have basic encryption even on every web browser, on every website. That just wasn't in place. A lot of the processing power just couldn't handle it. Our processors couldn't handle it. But you started getting access controls there. This is where, I mean, we had directories and that kind of thing that would control access through your IDs and what you could get access to. I mean, anybody start with Novell back in the day before Microsoft? So before, that's what I was using with your directory structure to control access to certain data. And then you kind of had email monitoring picking up in this time because a lot of people were starting to use email to actually send data. That's when that kind of started in that era again, was just a massive amount of data going across email. Nobody realized it was becoming like the biggest repository of data that you had, and that's where it started. The problem is just the protection of that, like I said before, is costly, pretty complex. I mean, we were talking about trying to authenticate pictures with every 30 frames or whatever. And I mean, that's daunting now. Back then, trying to get certificates and everything and any of that management of that was very costly, very complex. We really started seeing this in large enterprises, but in that protection, but most people couldn't afford it. Again, it was even costly to even get basic encryption put in place. But what you did start seeing, and this is what I was working on, a lot of my customers back then, was endpoint and network DLP. You started getting that where you need to look at that on the endpoint first to see what's on there, see if we can figure out what's there and control that data. Dan talked about it before. It was still very much, and it would be for a long time up until very recently, just pattern matching, that kind of thing, even on the network. So you're trying to do that content inspection, trying to do those pattern matching. You're looking for sensitive data like credit cards, social securities, that kind of stuff using static rules, keyword searches. You're trying to get encryption done in those places. Encryption and non-structured data non-structured place was very, very, very difficult. Usually you were getting it in databases. And if you had Oracle database or something like it would come native. I don't even think SQL had native encryption for quite a while. You had to have third-party stuff put on it. So, and then just your basic backup and recovery. Like, I hope I don't lose this stuff. So before I got into pre-sales, I used SunGuard. Anybody ever use SunGuard facilities? So yeah, Trevor. So we would do that. It was actually kind of cool because we had a cold site in Scottsdale, Arizona. So I would test my recovery procedures in the fall and in the spring in a resort where I stayed. And I would go to Scottsdale, Arizona, and I had to do this twice a year. And I would line it up where it was not the summer. It was really nice weather. Go to the SunGuard facility, get our VMware, get all the machines turned back on, get all the data. Hopefully it all worked. Say we had a successful one, that was backup or recovery. We had Iron Mountain grabbing our tapes every day, and I would mess with the guy with the tapes so he would know that I was serious about having the tapes. So that was all the tools that you had back then. It wasn't anything super complicated. So governance then in the early 2010s really started getting more frameworks around this, so stuff that was really formal. Everybody before was doing their own data governance, and then you started getting frameworks. You really started seeing alignment between IT, compliance, and the business units. This is where tools like, I think it was a little bit earlier than this, and sorry to name a competitor, but like tools like Varonis and that kind of stuff we're getting in. And they still had to scan your entire environments. You weren't really in the cloud as much back then, even though you got a nice little cool cloud up there. But they needed to start giving the business units, or at least telling the what you're supposed to do, which is the business units were supposed to tell you who had access to their data. That concept of they were the owner of the data and not IT started really getting generated in this time. The problem is that you had a lot of silos still, a lot of data all over the place, either structured, unstructured, you had it on their endpoints. I don't know how many access databases I had to go get off of people's machines back in the day with very sensitive data. When I worked in a hospital, had a risk management person, had this was when we were still on DOS, I guess, in that hospital. But they had a little custom-made application that had all this patient data sitting in it. And this HIPAA wasn't even a term at the time, really. It was just kind of whispered in the winds that it was coming. And this thing was just sitting there on this person's desktop. And I didn't know anything about it until they came to me and said, my hard drive failed, and I had to send it off to get it recovered. And we got all of it back, except for a few little bits and pieces. And that's when I was like, well, we need to back up your stuff on a regular basis. But it was just silos of data, consistency of policies was really a big challenge. What you started seeing, though, is this move into the cloud as this data started getting out there, which was mostly not IaaS, but SaaS. So depending on how you classify or define cloud, your first SaaS providers were really just sitting in a data center like in here, and they had all of their storage sitting in that data center. You were connecting to that. It was a service given to you, software as a service, but it really, most of those weren't sitting in AWS or any of that stuff. Some of them may have, but that early 2010s, this was mostly what SaaS was. And that's where your data was going. So think Salesforce, if you're a salesperson, any of those systems where you got customer data, that kind of thing, those were in the cloud. How do you start getting a look at what's in that system? How do you know that they're backing it up well? This is where you started getting your shared responsibility models and that stuff. Honestly, I didn't know this until I started doing my research, but this is when early CASB was starting to get put together. I didn't know it was that early. I didn't really start looking at CASB probably until like 2017, 2018. It was actually starting to get developed before that because all these SaaS platforms were starting to pop up. So the CASB development started right back then. Still very, very limited because there was only so many of these SaaS. They didn't have to be very wide because there was only so many SaaS providers. And then your challenges there was adapting that DLP to cloud and managing shared responsibility models. That's when you really started seeing the challenge of getting that DLP to not look at endpoints, but what's out of my environment, what has gotten moved up. And then the tools, well, you started seeing email and web gateway DLP really pop up. All of those things were already there, WebSense, those kind of things. But you started seeing the emails gateway. That was like, and I've got a whole slide on some of the tools, but like the iron ports and that kind of thing really started popping up. Data classification and discovery really started coming in. That's, again, where like Varonis and those were starting to do it. The basic cloud DLP for Dropbox, Google Drive. I remember one of the first times I talked to a CASB provider, it was just amazing to me that they could say, oh yeah, if you've got Dropbox or Gmail or whatever, you can only get to your company's version of it and not your personal one because of how this goes out. I mean, it made sense, but it was still pretty cool that they could do that. And this is where you started seeing user behavior monitoring and the good old MDM, which has got a new life. MDM has started coming back because of the way Macs are designed and everything else. But MDM, that was a really big topic for all of my customers because they all had phones. They had to have something on it to control that data. You remember, what was it? Good, I think, was the technology. Yeah, and that was the most frustrating thing in the world because it would isolate all your stuff on one part. You couldn't get it, then you had to flip it over. You couldn't copy paste. All the stuff you want to do on a smartphone, you couldn't do any of that stuff. It drove me absolutely mad. But that was some of your tools there. And then wait a minute, did I skip one? No, okay. So then as you started getting into the mid to late 2010s, this is where your regulations started popping up. So this is a regulations era. Really, where you started to see is people needing to align governance what they were doing internally. So, like I said before, it started out kind of getting governance put in, but it was all over the place, whatever the company decided to do. Then you started seeing standards come out that were kind of, everybody was going, okay, that's a good one to adopt. Then you started aligning that governance with regulations and standards. So you had to match something. We all know what that kind of has turned into, but that's essentially what the governance structures were starting to build. And then privacy by design and enhancing audit, you started seeing that get built into some of these tools where you would have capabilities to get into the tool, you would have some of the security and privacy built into those tools. The problem was you had regulations just like today, all over the place. You don't know which one you got to match, which one you got to follow. And everybody wants to throw one in. And God forbid you're an international company. You're going to have to match 15 other ones. And then what you started seeing here is now we've gone from SaaS to true cloud, IaaS providers, that kind of thing started popping up more. You had people actually hitting multi-cloud environments. So if y'all know the history of cloud, like as it started evolving with AWS, then to Azure, like just Houston specifically, everybody was doing AWS because it was, or if you were going to do cloud, but there were so many people in Houston and so many companies that did not like cloud that they waited to do cloud. They would just keep their own data centers. So numbers that I've seen, the majority of people, cloud users in Houston area and around, are actually Azure because they started getting into adopting that after the fact, after everybody had already done AWS. But what has happened is you've got developers that are starting to hit multiple clouds and starting to figure out they could use this shadow IT, shadow, all that stuff started popping up. So your protection then started really looking at the ransomware, the insider risk. How do you focus, or how do you build those protections around people saying, oh, hey, data actually is valuable. Let me go after this. This is where you started seeing the ransomware really starting to first time pop up. Insider risk. This is where CASB, DLP, UABA all started kind of coming together, started getting integrations together. I don't think we still had too many companies that were doing all of it yet, but it was starting to pop up. But some of the problems you had was just false positives. You still weren't at a state, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, a state where we are now, where you're getting technology can actually find this data and classify it the right way. Data protection within IaaS providers. We all know how many people found cloud or found their storage, like blob storage or any of the AWS storage, where they were just access into it all over the place. That's when this has really started kicking off. Getting real-time detections done, that was still pretty difficult. And then reporting on compliance. It was interesting at ExecSecCon this week, I was moderating a CISO panel, and I asked them, and I expected a different answer, honestly. I said, how many of you just are basically still having problems with compliance? Is it a hindrance or is it a good thing? And all four of them said it's a good thing. We see it as an ability to do. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I thought compliance was like a huge pain. And they were like, oh, well, it used to be, but now we've got all this good tooling that is helping us align all of these different regulations and different standards. And we can map all this stuff out really well. And we could just hand somebody, here you go. This is where I'm meeting all of these different compliance. So we've actually grown a lot, but this is when the pain really, really started here, is when you're having to comply and you didn't have any tooling to help you with do that. It was just, what'd you have? How'd you follow your compliance back in the day? Spreadsheets, yeah. People still do that, but then tools. So this is what we were talking about before, some of the technology difficulties you had. Now key management starting to pop up. You're starting to get DLP and actually data masking if you're or even doing tokenizing of data. This is when this kind of started. PCI was really starting to hit people really hard even before this. I've got a customer right now that it's actually driving me a little mad. We were trying to figure out their how much their scope was for PCI, where it is in their network. And honestly, in the last 5 years, I've used to just hearing, oh, we've got a payment processor. They just goes to that. They tokenize all that. We don't have any really scope. It's just there. This customer tried to do that. For whatever reason, it failed. They still have all their credit card data in their data center. And they're a customer you would know, not necessarily that you would be a customer or a company you would know. You may not be their customer because they're in a different geographic, but you've heard of them before. And I was just absolutely flabbergasted that they had data, like credit card data, in their network still. But it's because for whatever reason it had a problem. But this is where this started really, where you're having to comply to PCI, comply to all those different things. And how do you start reducing your scope? How do you start figuring out, I don't want this data sitting all in my network, or I want to automatically encrypt it. The user entity behavior analytics, UEBA, the insider risk became more and more and more of a thing as people were either wanting to steal the data, take it to a competitor, or whether they were wanting to just be mad at you because you fired them and they were going to blow it up or whatever. That UEBA's really started, and data lineage, figuring out where it came from. This all these tools were getting kind of put in place. So I know that's pretty much an eye chart, but what I tried to do when I was building this out for my customer, and we were all in a much smaller room so everybody could kind of get up to the screen and see this. But this is kind of a timeline on that correlation of what all those challenges are, and I'll share these slides. But what all these slides were, are all these the time frame and the big data era, collaboration, regulation. That's kind of what the correlation of all that stuff I just talked about. And then there's some tools as well that I talked about. And if you want to look at some old history of some of these tools, some still exist. Intrust is still around. Veritas has changed hands, I think, 5 times. So is EMC, Code Green, all of these different companies. Some are still around, some have gotten acquired, but that was kind of a tool example vendor timeline I put together for them. And sorry about the shift in colors. I didn't have time to get all this colorized and changed, but this is basically what we had in a traditional perimeter security from that perspective, from 2000s all the way to 2010s. I mean, everybody was familiar. You did have some of the cloud resources, but you had the old implicit trust zone. If you were behind that firewall, you were good. No worries whatsoever. Data's just floating around all over the place. It doesn't matter. You had access to it. You had your branch, you had your roamers on their VPNs, on their laptops or whatever. All this making sense so far? Is this, I mean, anybody disagree with what I've said or any additions to it? Or okay. I guess I was right. Hell. But very, very traditional. We were all used to that, right? So now we start getting into the 2010s into today. This is what I'm considering the data intelligence era. Again, I don't know if anybody else came up with these terms. This is just how I classified it. So what we see today, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit where I see us as a state from a data security perspective, is all of the data that we've got. Companies for a long time realized that the data was valuable, but they didn't know exactly what to do with it. So what they started building in was like, you've got these, you can start building business insights through what was machine learning, now AI. You always wanted to build those data insights. You always had people doing that work, trying to figure out patterns and everything else. But today now we've got much more advanced technology that's able to do some of that stuff. And that's not just cybersecurity, that's just in general. Your companies that you work for or own or whatever, you've got data, you want to do something with it. I mean, like for us, for HUSECCon, up until last year, we didn't collect mandatorily anyway. We didn't make it mandatory for you to put your location or where you lived. Now we want to know how many national people we're starting to attract to the conference, because that's a goal of ours. So we want to know that. So we're making that mandatory now. That's all really good data. I went from 2010, when I started this dang thing, all the way to 2024 without collecting that. That was kind of stupid. But, I know that I should be able to collect this stuff. Then if you're doing that with AI and ML, and so you need to start automating that compliance reporting, which is a big thing now to streamline that regulatory adherence. So that just what I was saying, I didn't even doing this research into this, when I talked to those CISOs, I didn't think the answer would be, yes, this is getting streamlined. This is working now. I was just flabbergasted. Probably because I'm not an operational CISO. I go talk to them, but I didn't have that data from them that this was getting easier. I literally had a customer advisory board 2 years ago that was the number one complaint they all had. And from 2 years, some of those same people were saying, this is not near as big of a deal as it used to be. Still sucks, but you can get all these things answered a little bit easier. So what we're seeing now, though, the challenge is integrating governance with all of the new emerging technologies that are coming out. In order to protect this, today you've got cloud native, IaaS, PaaS, SaaS. You got all of it in there. It really, especially SaaS, is just completely boomed with the boom of the cloud because it's so easy to create a SaaS provider now. You got, well, that's a ZTA, sometimes ZTNA, zero trust access. That's a really big thing. People think that's a buzzword. I think it's a very true concept. I'll name drop. I know John Kindervag. He's a good friend, known him for a long time. I think conceptually, this is not something that was new. It was just something that needed a name and needed to put some structure around it. But it is something that is more available today. People like to think of that as it's just access, but it's what are you accessing? It's accessing data. So this is a network thing that is stopping you from getting access to the crown jewels. So ZTA is a big thing. I talked about email before as being the big database of where all of the data is, and nobody expected it to be that way. Dan mentioned this before, Zoom, Teams, Slack, all that stuff. I've shared 1 million files in Slack. We do it all the time and inside of USecCon. I do that even at my company, at my day job. We're sharing stuff all the time. And where are we pulling it from? Oh, I'm going up to SharePoint where everybody's got freaking access to the thing, and I'm putting it in Slack so they can see it in there, and then they pull it up on their desktop, and then they copy it to their desktop. It makes absolutely no sense. Why don't I just send them a link? We're starting to get to that point where at least I'm getting more disciplined to give them a link so they can get access to it, so it's not getting spread all over the place. But now what you have from a protection place, and this is what I'm going to talk about in a little bit, is API usage, and you've got DSPM. So even though these are shown as like protections, some people can see them as challenges you've got such an abundance of cloud providers that I think, and I'll explain it in a second, I think that's all a good thing. Having more cloud, more APIs, and tools that can use those things are actually getting us to a point where we've never been able to protect our data before. It's a better thing. But you still got a challenge of building proactive posture management and automating that anomaly detection. And that's where you're starting to see DSPM and other tools like that starting to pop up, just like I'm talking about here. So zero trust architecture tools. Y'all familiar with microsegmentation? I think microseg is about as close as you can get to zero trust in a box. It's not completely there because it's not able to do everything. But you've got those kind of tools. You got DSPM tools. And I think, Pedro, this is getting kind of reclassified now too, not just where it's DSPM. Y'all are calling it all kinds of platforms and all kinds of crap. I mean, a lot of it's marketing, a lot of it's, whatever. But I still call it DSPM essentially, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. You're starting to get those secure collaboration platforms that have CASB integrated into it. There's also SaaS security posture management that helps with a lot of this as well. So you're getting, CASB can only go so far, it's generally going to be network driven. Now you've got, with API access, you've got tools that are SSPM, not DSPM, that are able to get into those. And I'm actually writing a whole blog post about this right now, how the security posture management tools are doing some really cool stuff, enable us to get to a point where we can actually do some of the stuff that they say we should have been doing all these years. And the API security tools itself, if you're going to have API access and all this stuff, then you probably need to secure the APIs themselves. So we kind of talked about that earlier in some of the discussion topics. So especially if you're going to have AI having access to all these APIs. What was the protocol called again? Model context protocol. Yeah. So we need to secure those things, not have just the keys floating around everywhere. Somebody said API keys are the modern password. Like if those stay static, you're hosed. So again, another timeline. That was just all this early stuff grayed out, and then it's down there at the end. Don't have to read that. Then some of those vendors. So what we're seeing, and I swear I did not change this to put Concentric at the top, Pedro and Dan. Concentric was the first ESPM I worked with, and we did. They're not paying me for that. Well, they kind of are. But yeah, thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. They were one of the first ones where we had somebody use some of the older technology like Varonis, that kind of thing, or it was Stealth Bits actually, and they had a massive problem. And Pedro ran this project, and they had a massive problem getting through all their data. It would churn and churn and churn and churn and die. Couldn't make it all the way through it. Then it would try to start over, and it couldn't start from where it stopped, so it would have to start all over again. And it was the first time I ever seen a customer get a full refund for a 3-year contract. Like they just got the full refund back. Concentric went in there and had it. I don't know, was it like 2 or 3 days? Had it figured out, and we were able to build a whole data security program for them. So the DSPMs, I'm not saying that's just Concentric, because they do have competitors, and they've had one of their biggest competitors do this sponsor for us before. So it's as a classification, a tool classification, it's extremely strong, and it actually enables you to do stuff in data security that nobody could do before. Actually, that's the second one up there, is the one that Sarah, sorry. All right, again, bad color, but this is what we're seeing now. So you're starting to get this SASE architecture. Everybody's connecting out to the internet, to IaaS, PaaS, SaaS. They're doing all of that through not everybody's doing this, but generally from a stack, a security stack that is web enabled. Like you don't have to have a firewall sitting there with all your DLP and your antivirus and all these things all sitting there where it's going through the stack. You're doing this all up into up in the web or up in the internet where all of this is getting pulled through. All of your zones, and if you do have the data server, if it's not an IaaS, or even if it is, you're generally zoning all those servers out, keeping those segmented, doing micro-segmentation if you're going to do it. Your endpoints are pretty much the same. Like that's what I said, MDM has kind of come back a lot lately, especially with how Macs have made you access that. So when I'm just in our few computers, I have to use Purview and stuff to do some of this stuff for Macs that you can't do with the old way you used to do it. And then the collaboration tools down there as well. Those are just really, really popular. And of course, you got IoT everywhere, which that's been around for a while. But all that makes sense? Everybody just nodding their heads. I guess I'm. All right. So what does all this mean? That is AI too. I did that with ChatGPT. It did screw that up a couple of times. I had letters all over the freaking place, and did it like 4 times, and it worked out. But it's getting a lot better. It's getting a whole lot better. So current state of data protection, as I see it, we have reached is, Lauren's going to kill me because I keep hitting this thing, and I think it's probably I'm sorry. She's going to have to edit this video, and I'm in my thing. I'm so sorry, Lauren. So I think we've reached this foundational maturity. So we've got robust controls. We got locations that are predictable. So where is your data generally? How many places? Somebody just throw out where's your data? Where's one place your data might be? What? SharePoint, OneDrive. Well, I mean, but cloud, right? As a general concept, cloud. Where else? What? Dark. Still the cloud. It's the internet. But you got it on the endpoints, maybe, right? On your laptop. I've got this presentation is actually not it's temporarily on the RAM on this iPad, but it's in the cloud. This is pulled straight from the cloud, straight from OneDrive. There's only so many places it can go, right? in general. Yeah, it can be on the dark web and it's getting pulled from somewhere. But where did that get pulled from? Probably your server somewhere or the cloud somewhere where you're putting it. You used a bad password, you reused the password, whatever. The locations are predictable. There's really nowhere else for the data as a larger concept to go. It's going to be in those places. We've got adaptive governance. That's really starting to get fixed, as I saw the other day. We got real-time monitoring that's really with modern tools. You're getting posture changes. As Dan said, you don't do this as a point in time. You do this ongoing. The tools are there. The access is there with APIs. APIs are easier to use if you're putting your data in the cloud. Everybody says, I don't want to put my data in the cloud. It's going to be there. But from a security perspective, you can think of it in one way that it's actually easier to secure if you put it in the cloud and put the controls in the right way. Because if you got all of it on your servers, sometimes that's not as easy to get access to your APIs and to be able to scan that stuff. They can still do it, like Sierra and Concentric can do stuff on-prem, but Pedro, would you agree it's not as easy to do the stuff on-prem as it is in the cloud, right, from an API perspective? So that, if you think about it in one way, I don't want to put it in the cloud. If you think about it the other way and you do it the right way with using APIs and using modern tooling, it's actually more secure being in the cloud if you use all the tools to get it, make sure you don't have bad access to it or open access. We've got the innovative solutions. We do have an evolving threat landscape. I'm going to talk about the advanced stuff here in a little bit. Guess I'm okay on time, right? So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So there are new threats coming to it, but in general, there's no new places where your data is going to go. And there's easier access from an API and cloud perspective, or easier security and posture management, the ability to have posture management and not have to scan a bunch of servers, not stand up a bunch of your own SQL servers and that kind of crap to pull all that stuff in. It's easier to do. So really, I think in general, the pieces are in place for a really modern, mature data security program for anybody now, if you'll do it the right way. And I'm not saying that's easy. I'm not saying like all of a sudden you can flip a switch and all your data's in the cloud and you got all your APIs configured correctly and got all the security pieces in place. But I do think the general pieces are in place. I don't see anything changing from that perspective. So I think you can kind of read that. But what I did was kind of build a modern data protection structure. I'm not going to go through all of this, but you still got your DLPs still there. That's up here onto the left, or my left, your right. Data encryption, key management is getting easier these days. Identity access management is maturing all the time. Data access monitoring, analytics, cloud security, all of these things, all these tools are really starting to get put in place now and mature. You're going to have good tools, you're going to have bad tools, but overall, the structure's there, the tools are there. If you put all this stuff in place, you can get a pretty modern data protection structure put in place. That's really bad. So this is kind of how I'm seeing it as, and some of these may work. I mean, those colors are really bad. Sorry about that. Again, I'll share the slides. But as anything, what I tend to look at in security from a posture perspective is what is your maturity? I don't expect anybody to always say, or everybody to always say, I'm going to be optimized. That's what that really hard one to see up there is. But generally, this is how I'm kind of starting to see it, where you want to start, you get your cybersecurity essentials in place. You start figuring out where your data is, get your DLP, your identity and access management basics in place. You start getting that data classification and retention policies put in place. Not saying you're already classifying your data, you're getting the policies put in place on how you want to classify your data. You could argue you want to discover all your data first before you do that. That's kind of the chicken and the egg, but generally, at a lower level, you want private, you want public, you want classified, however you want to classify that and put it together. Get your access monitoring, your cloud security put in place, you get your SIEM and SOAR put in place, you get your conditional access put in place. microsegmentation, resilient backups, DSPM, and then automation, and you're there. It's that easy, right? Just done. But seriously, I mean, you may never reach the mountain peak and get up into the hot air balloon up there, but and you could classify this differently. This is not really a formula. I kind of put it together how it was in my head. You can move this all over the place if you want. The reason DSPM is up there, but I also kind of consider it what I was talking about, the data classification and retention policies where it could be below, is DSPM is data security posture management. But what Dan and Pedro were talking about earlier, it's got ability to classify stuff and discover stuff that we've never had before. So you've got to have that in there before you can even do it. And it's a part of their tool that you want to run first, and then you use it later to continuously find that and find the posture and start really trying to fix some of that stuff and even stop things from happening. So you've got some ability to do that. That all makes sense? So then advanced threats, as I'm seeing them, that one's got a cool little scary face on it. AI obviously is there. Don't throw anything at me for saying quantum computing. I think that is going to be an issue sooner than we think. Microsoft put out some really big stuff, just like a month ago or something. There's some advances happening there. I don't think they're exactly correlating, but they're going to be, quantum computing I do think is not just from a data perspective, even though that's where I'm talking about it here, but it's going to help and have caused problems with AI. Ransomware evolution, and then API and supply chain. So some of these are kind of futuristic. Some of these are current, somewhere in between. Some of them are current but evolving. But can y'all read that okay? All right. So AI-powered attacks, we're already seeing this from personalized phishing campaigns. I think Mary had been on board for, a week before we saw the first email come by, and it had a perfect signature and her title, and I need you to change my ACH information. I mean, in a week, right? They'd gone out on LinkedIn after she had updated. Boom, we had it. I mean, it's really coming really quick. We talked about deepfakes earlier. That's really becoming a big thing. The data poisoning in AI models, we're seeing that as more companies build out their own AI models. I think a lot of that's still in research, but that's happening more. And I mean, Hutch could probably give a whole 2-hour talk on that subject itself. Then AI augmented malware, that's absolutely going to be even more of an issue coming forward. Are you seeing any of that now where it's like getting built?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the challenges is with the AI augmented malware is short of actually reverse engineering the samples, the actual activity looks more or less the same from the outside. I think we are seeing some that are in the wild that are doing kind of the polymorphic modifying the code in real time. But I haven't seen as much yet, and I suspect it will be a thing. It's actually using it for dynamic command and control. But yeah, I think it's coming. I think it'll continue to be more of a problem, especially as we get better functionality in smaller models, so that they don't have to make a call out to Anthropic or OpenAI in order to get that functionality.
Oh, as a model, then you can contain them. Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to go grab it. You can, so it'd be a whole nice little package that gets thrown on your machine. That's really cool. Yeah, so that's coming down the road. So that is more of a future one. Quantum computing. You've already got everybody saying, to protect against quantum computing. A lot of this now is like data. It may be a little old, but there's a lot of people that are harvesting that now and are going to be able to break it later on. That's still a concern. All of a sudden, you think all that data is not a big deal. You've got it purged out of your system, and then somebody comes back and holds you hostage because they got some data you didn't want released, and they were able to decrypt it later on with quantum computing. I don't know how long it's going to be. It's a future thing, but people are doing it. I mean, nation states are collecting data just to have the stuff. So ransomware evolution, I mean, we're already seeing double, triple extortion, encrypt, and leak. That's something that's happening now. AI power targeting, you're really starting to see that advanced social engineering, uh, AI optimized attack strategies. Am I running out of time? Okay, this is my last slide, I think. Yeah, but thank you. Oh, don't allow. No, I don't want you taking my picture. What are you doing? See what you did, Mary? That's all right. There's back. And then API and supply chain stuff. Well, we talked about the APIs getting ubiquitous. The unsecured API proliferation is a really big thing, and then supply chain attacks obviously happening right now. Third-party attacks, software dependencies, all those are causing issues. So those are some of the advanced things that are happening and are happening now or coming, but I don't think it changes the basic equation and basic thesis, which is we're in a mature place from a tools perspective, and we need to start maturing what we're doing using what's existing. And don't be scared of cloud. Look at it, and APIs, look at them, if you do it right, as an enabler for security and not necessarily something that's going to cause you to be more or less secure. All right, that's it. Mary gave me the hook. I got to stop. So thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.